The likely MVP and the likely MVP runner-up matched up tonight in Milwaukee, and I'll let you decide which is which. The Beard will make his case to repeat, and he'll go head-to-head against the Greek Freak, who can aid his final push with a season sweep of the Rockets tonight and a players-only edition of TNT. Hey everybody, it's Game Time live from our Atlanta World NBA TV headquarters. I'm Matt Weiner, Dahntay Jones. That's David Griffin right over there. Good to have you along with us. Feeling good about the MVP versus MVP?
You saw what happened there on the lead-in. It was Harden and P.J. Tucker. I did not know P.J. Tucker was going to be the runner-up for MVP.
I was thinking the same thing.
idea.
Not what I was referencing.
That's what I
But
thought.
I see where the confusion might be. Speaking about James Harden and Giannis Antetokounmpo, of course, the regular season ends 2 weeks from tomorrow now. Just a handful of games for the top two candidates for MVP to prove their points, starting against each other tonight. Rockets and Bucks on TNT. We'll get into the MVP arguments for each in just a little bit. But first, let's hear from the headliners.
I'm a hooper. I love to hoop. I know hooping isn't going to be here forever, so I let it do. I let it get out there and compete. The best days are when your legs are a little tired, you know, and your shots isn't falling. Those are the best days because you got to figure a way to get through it. So, I love to go out there and compete and hoop.
I don't care about the MVP conversation. I'm not on social media. So.
Is that a recent thing that you got off social media? Are you trying to avoid it?
Yeah, I'm definitely trying to. I don't want to think about it. I just want to do my job. We got 8 games left. Try to get better. Try to improve. And try to play basketball in a high level, and everything's going to take care of itself.
You can make a valid argument for both players for MVP, and I probably couldn't refute your argument. Both have put up crazy numbers, both traditional numbers and these analytical numbers. Giannis is tops in player efficiency rating. He has the edge in win shares. Harden leads the league in scoring, of course, but Giannis is the more efficient shooter technically, leading the league in points in the restricted area. Harden has much higher assist and usage rates, and the heavier burden offensively, of course, falls on his shoulders. And this is one of those seasons, a rare one, in which the winner isn't fairly obvious this late, and there are valid arguments for both of them. Some of it will simply depend on what voters value in their most valuable players. A couple of MVP arguments, themes have stood the test of time. We're going to lay these out for the folks at home. Some apply to one, some apply to the other. You can decide for yourself. In the Freaks' favor, best player on the best team in the league. It's an argument you hear a lot about MVPs this time of year, and he fits that category.
And it's very valid. Like, he's leading the best team. They be consistent all year long. He's their dominant force on the offense and the defensive side of the ball. You can't deny him in that capacity. He's leading that charge. He's set the standard for that team. He's set the standard for wanting to win and achieve their goal of winning the championship and put him in a great position to. So he's my choice if I had to pick an MVP because I look at the defensive side of the ball and I think he's that anchor for the best defensive team in basketball.
Yeah, I think relative to the credentials of best player on the best team, that's undeniable that that's who he is. He's carrying the team with the best record. A team that's made a quantum leap from last year, in large part because Mike Budenholzer has been given the weapons with Brook Lopez first and later Mirotic to open the floor up for Giannis. Right. So the ball-dominant play creation of a non-shooter with all that shooting around him, he's the perfect fit for Bud. And they've taken that team to all new heights. So certainly a valid argument relative to that.
He has the best net rating on the team with the best record in the NBA. That is that argument in a statistical nutshell. He also dominates on both ends of the floor. Unlike Harden, Giannis is the anchor to the best defense in the NBA.
Yeah.
Check.
Right.
That's the other broad-based argument we've set up here.
So we can't deny that he plays both sides of the ball. One guy is dominating the offensive side of the ball, but one is doing both sets. And I think that weighs a lot on an individual. And he has to have that respect in the conversation when we talk about this.
I agree that I think Giannis is a more impactful defender more often. I think what you see with James, you see a lot of defenders that are like this, and you've seen this from teammates, I'm sure. Guys that are pretty good when they're on the ball and everyone's watching. Mm-hmm. But when they're on the weak side and they think they're not being seen and their activity level isn't going to be charted quite as much, not quite as active. Right. And I think in Giannis's case, he's just sort of frenetic all the time. So I think there is an edge for him on the defensive side of the ball. My argument in favor of James Harden doesn't have anything to do with either one of these boxes
No.
that he checks.
Absolutely.
And so it's interesting to me. It's a fascinating story.
And to your point, his post defense, particularly when he's matched up against bigger players, is pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good for James Harden. The Rockets are a better defensive team when he is off the floor, but in moments he can do the job. On the other hand, in Harden's favor, you hear a lot about load management these days. How about the load he's had to carry all season, including the stretches without star teammates on the floor?
He's been the most dominant offensive force we've seen in a long time, and he needs that respect. He's been carrying the load. When CP's been out, he's been carrying that load for that team and brought them from the bottom of the Western Conference, which is impressive. Had them in the conversation of winning the championship when we all thought at the beginning of the season they didn't have a shot and it was over for that team. So he's in this race because of what he does. So he's so special on that offensive side of the ball, and he assists and scores with the best of them.
I'm super grateful I don't have a vote because this is really difficult this year. And we say this every year that it's difficult. This is one for me, though, because of everything that we've already said about Giannis. It's hard to say that's not an MVP. And if not for a year in which James Harden is doing something statistically, historically significant with the run he's on, the scoring he's been able to do, the load he's been able to carry on a team that's maintained themselves as one of the great playoff teams in the Western Conference, despite all of these absences. So what 156 rotation player games means, they've lost more games than that due to injury. But 156 of those games were in the form of players that were clearly in their top 8 to 9 rotation. They've had 20 different starting lineups, and the most frequent lineup played 18 games together. Giannis has only had 89 rotation games missed, 10 different starting lineups, and their most frequent lineups played 57 games together. So while Giannis has been consistent and he's been good all year, he's done it with very little turmoil and very little up and down in the lineup. James Harden has had to carry this team in a brutal Western Conference playoff race without Chris Paul, with Chris Paul, without Clint Capella, with Clint Capella, without Eric Gordon, with Eric Gordon. And when you have these guys be out of the lineup and you completely revolutionize the way the game is played, what they did was they took the perfect coach in Mike D'Antoni for the perfect player in James Harden, working under the perfect front office, and they said, you know what, we're going to reverse engineer the game of basketball, and we're going to control every single possession one at a time. James will be more efficient than whoever the ball-dominant play creator is on the other team, and if we play slow enough, you can score. We don't even need to stop you. Right. We'll score more efficiently than you. And James is the perfect weapon for that kind of mad scientist approach, and because of that, he's great without those guys. And when they've come back, he's still found a way to be just as efficient. And to me, this is historic. 20, 30 years from now, people are going to look back and say, well, the only people that have ever done that are James Harden, Wilt Chamberlain, and Michael Jordan.
Right. He's a puzzle that no one has been able to solve. And that leads us to the final argument on Harden's behalf, and you touched on it. Historic numbers, starting with the highest scoring average in 32 seasons as it stands right now.
If that does anything for you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's fascinating to me. And the other thing that's so funny for me, and you and I have probably talked about this in the past, but this is a mea culpa on my part. I don't like watching it. Like, the way he plays is not enjoyable.
A lot of people don't.
And so I was holding that against him. And I was holding that against the Rockets in general terms, saying, this isn't basketball I appreciate. But once I let all of that go and I just live in the moment of how truly ridiculous what his accomplishments are, it's a really enjoyable thing to watch someone be in the process of changing what greatness in a sport looks like. It's literally, this is Pele. This is somebody completely changing the dynamic within a sport. And we're getting to watch it right now. It's spectacular to be part of watching this happen.
He gave an amazing case for it, and he's opened my eyes to a couple of things. But when you look at the amount of players he's had to play with in the different type of rotations, the only thing that changes is the complementary players. James still does what he does regardless of who you put on the floor.
It's the same game plan every night.
Right, same game plan. So you just put the same type of players that were out on the floor. They did a great job. Their GM did a great job of replacing those players with the. When Clint was out, what did you have? What did you go do?
They went and got Kenneth Faried.
Yeah. Right, and the same thing comes off. So now they have the same thing coming off the bench. It doesn't change for James. You guys screen, rebound, compliment James, do all the things that James doesn't do. be ready for shots. Austin Rivers, Iman Shumpert, they added these guys. So they've done a great job with their organization of bringing guys in when injuries hit and creating the same type of environment for him, regardless of who's on the floor.
It is sort of diabolically simple, right? You know exactly what you're getting when the Rockets come to your arena, but chances are you can't stop it.
Regardless of who's on the floor, who's going to play tonight.
As long as Harden's
not going to play, you got people that can affect the ball on the defensive side of the game and play without the ball in their hands.
No, and I think that's exactly right. And I wish, for the life of me, I wish I could remember the football coach that this was said about. I want to say it was said about Bear Bryant, but I could be wrong. He could take yours and beat his.
Bum Phillips.
Right. And he said it about whom?
He said it about. Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah,
Bum Phillips said it, and I can't remember.
So Bum Phillips said something to the effect of, he can take yours and beat his'n. Right?
Yep.
He can take your'n and beat his'n.
Yep.
And he can take his'n and beat your'n.
Yep.
I think what you just said about Kenneth Faried and about Austin Rivers and about Iman Shumpert and all the interchangeable pieces that Daryl Morey and his front office are able to put there says everything you need to know about James Harden. He takes all these guys from any other team. Give me anybody that plays any role.
Right.
Give me a widget. I'll make that win games in the Western Conference. That's amazing.
As long as I have Harden in the lineup, right? He's the linchpin of the whole thing, just as Steve Nash was under Mike D'Antoni in Phoenix. That system doesn't work without Nash.
It doesn't work.
This one doesn't work without James Harden. Have you come to a conclusion based on all these arguments?
No.
Okay.
No. At the end of the day, in a perfect world, it would be a co-MVP, and we can get rid of all this because both guys really deserve it. It just depends on how you feeling that day.
I agree.
Ballot doesn't work that way. You got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Don't bring facts into the story.
I know. That's just the way the ballot works. Mike D'Antoni would probably lean James Harden, I'm guessing. Here he is tonight ahead of the game. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, Mike Budenholzer tonight. He would lean Giannis on the game tonight against Harden and the Rockets.
Thinking a little bit back to that last Rockets game, I know we talked to Bled about it a little bit this morning, but you guys had planned to, push Harden a certain way, and then Bled exaggerated it a little bit. Just what goes into the talk with him tonight about how you prepare for Harden and, what you want him to try to do there?
We'll see what Bled does tonight. I mean, it's been it's been a great year to work with Bled and just kind of, hopefully just learn about him and give him some freedom and opportunities to, just take advantage of his special skills defensively. And so, I'm sure Harden will be, smarter. I think we're not the only team that's kind of tried some similar things. And I think it's the group around, whoever it is, Bled or George or Chris or Sterling, it takes everybody kind of participating. So, but it's good to have some experience, have some film to watch sometimes where we could do it better, sometimes where we had some success. So, but I think Bled and Brooke have a very good working relationship. It's really about those two guys.
Last time, obviously, Chris Paul wasn't there. So in terms of sort of following on from that question, I guess, how does that change with them having another guy that perhaps last time it was a little easier to predict who was going to have the ball for the majority of the time?
Well, certainly. Chris Paul's a great player. Gives them another guy who can kind of take some of the workload off of Harden, especially when he's out, but including when he's in. And, then, we've been guarding lots of good players all year, and he's just, another one of them we got to be prepared for. And if the ball's in his hands, then, we'll guard him.
Tony had started the last two games in place of Malcolm, and it was Nico before that, and then he went down. Is it sort of the next man up, and who is the next man up for that starting spot?
Sterling's going to start tonight. So, that spot does feel like we haven't been able to have somebody for a stretch of games. So hopefully, Sterling can, and really just the whole group, we can stay healthy and, settle in a little bit.
Coach Mike Budenholzer there. That's Steve Ashburner from Milwaukee. Wrote a detailed analysis of the MVP race and what makes an MVP on NBA.com. Ash, good to have you with us. In your experience, what are the voters most drawn to?
Hi, thanks for having me on. I was trying to go to school on what you guys were talking about earlier because I do vote for this. What you said from the top, the best player on the best team, has seemed to be sort of the umbrella criterion when guys sort of roll up their sleeves and start to analyze this thing. And then you look for personal preferences, things that you might judge. quirks in terms of what went on during the season. If a player was out, you can't be out too many games and still be the MVP, but if you were out a certain number and your team really slumped, somehow that will bolster a case. There are things like that. You try to gauge the level of teammates and supporting casts and who has the most help. And at the same time, the better those players are, sometimes the MVP candidate gets credit for elevating the games of those guys. So you can't always go by that either. It really is sort of a nebulous concept. What does valuable mean to you? And we all grapple with it almost every year.
Yeah, that is the beauty and sort of the curse of the whole thing, that the MVP is not really defined in any way, and it's up to each voter. For you, Ash, you mentioned you vote, you have voted for years. What do you value most, if you can even pinpoint one thing?
You know, it gets a little bit of a derogatory tone when this is mentioned, but people will talk about narrative. And I know it came up in 2011 with Derrick Rose. And people said, well, LeBron James was a superior player. It was his first year in Miami. That should have been, sealed the deal. But Derrick Rose and what he accomplished, and with a brand new coach, and that coming together of that Bulls team with 60-plus victories, that narrative can play a big role. I think Giannis has largely owned the narrative this season. James Harden, obviously, with the spectacular crooked numbers, and that has turned a lot of people's heads, I think. And this could go down right to Game 82, which that's a little funky too, because some teams won't have as much to play for in the final few games. And
people also confuse, when they talk about LeBron versus Derrick Rose, for instance, in 2011, best player in the league. That's not necessarily the MVP, at least for most voters, it's not. Because it is so late in the season, this game really sets up as a showcase for this race. How much should the head-to-head meetings even matter?
Well, it's got to be special. When you've got an East-West situation with the two favorites for MVP, they only face each other twice at most, and, until they get to the finals and the ballots are long cast. That adds, I think, an extra element to this. These teams met in early January, so when you factor in recency bias, which we hear a lot in situations like this, we'll remember this game when we fill out our ballots. We'd have to go back and look up what happened when they met in January. So if there's a decided edge tonight, one guy scores 45, the other guy struggles and scores 15, that could play a role, even though it's just one of 82.
Really interesting race. Steve Ashburner, one of the voters who will be tasked with deciding who of these remarkable players is the MVP for 2019, and he writes about it today on NBA.com. Appreciate it, Ash. Enjoy it tonight.
Thank you, Matt.
All right, more coming up here on Game Time Live. The game with playoff implications on a night the Heat honor an all-star who's played more than his share of postseason games. Chris Bosh next.